Welcome everybody to Fresh Catholic Teaching Series number 4. This is episode 4 of a 5-episode series on the sacraments and grace. I'm Charles Merritt, and today we'll be taking a look at 2 sacraments in particular, holy orders and holy matrimony. And by way of kind of a review, as I mentioned, it's a 5-episode series, this being episode number 4. In episode 1, we looked at the sacramental system in general. In episode 2, we looked at grace in general and the different types of graces. And then beginning last episode, episode 3, continuing this episode, episode 4, and finishing next episode, episode 5, we're taking a look at each of the 7 sacraments individually. Now again, this is not an exhaustive treatment of each sacrament. It's 3, 4, 5 things that Catholics should know about each of these sacraments. And we started this run through the 7 sacraments last episode, where we looked at baptism, confirmation, and anointing of the sick. As I mentioned today, we'll look at holy orders and holy matrimony, and then we'll finish off next episode looking at reconciliation and the Eucharist. So we'll go ahead and take these 2 sacraments in that order, holy orders first and holy matrimony second, and we'll learn the same types of things about these 2 that we learned about the previous 3 and that we'll learn about all 7. That is, again, not an exhaustive treatment, but, some consideration of how they're administered, what each sacrament's matter and form is, what the sacrament's effect is, what they do. And then also I weave in a couple of questions that people sometimes have or often comes up about each of the sacraments. So, long story short, we'll attack these 2 like we attacked the previous 3 and like we will attack the final 2. So with that said, let's dive in holy orders, holy matrimony, looking at holy orders first. Now, first of all, how is it administered? Holy orders is administered by the bishop, and like every sacrament, it has its own particular matter and its own particular form. This sacrament, the matter is the laying on of hands. Because remember, the matter is the tangible element. The form are the words, oftentimes coming in the form of a prayer. So the matter being a tangible element in this sacrament is the laying on of hands. The form, the words, come in the form of a prayer. But since there are 3 degrees of holy orders, bishop, priest, and deacon, the prayer for each is different, but in each of the 3 cases, the matter is the laying on of hands, the form is a particular type of prayer. So that's how the sacrament is administered and its matter and form. Now, question is it biblical? And like with everything in the Catholic faith, as we've said many times, is eminently biblical. And if we were to go into Scripture to try and locate when Christ instituted this sacrament, we can find 2 places. The first one is in the Gospel of Luke, where in the upper room on Holy Thursday night, during the Last Supper, Christ institutes not only the Eucharist, which we'll talk about next week, but also the sacrament of holy orders, the priesthood. Because after saying, this is my body, take and eat. This is the chalice of my blood. After Jesus utters those words that form the consecratory prayer that the priest prays over the bread and wine, turning them into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. After Christ utters those words, and again, who is there with them? The apostles. He says, do this in memory of me. So that this he's talking about is basically, confecting his body, blood, soul, and divinity. So, and of course, going back to the Old Testament, one of the main jobs of priests, if not the main job of priests, were to offer sacrifice. So if we start with our old buddy, the Old Testament, and the knowledge that priests offer sacrifice, they offered sacrifices at the temple, and we move it into Holy Thursday night in that upper room when Christ utters these words, this is my body, this is my blood, and then says, do this to me, we know that the following day he's going to go to the sacrifice of the cross. So when Jesus says, do this in memory of me, he's saying, do this sacrifice. And since priests offer sacrifices, that's when he instituted the priesthood. We also find it in the Gospel of John, a little lesser known confirmation of it, because in the Gospel of John, another thing Jesus does in that upper room, and we're familiar with it, is the washing of the apostles' feet. Now again, if we go back again to our buddy the Old Testament, one of the rituals that priests would have to, one of the rituals that priests would have to go through in becoming priests in the Old Testament, part of the priestly ritual was a foot washing. So when Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, in addition to all the other things we know that signifies, he's replicating that foot washing ritual that priests got when they were made priests in the Old Testament. So is this sacrament biblical? Definitely. Now, what does it do? Okay, several things. Number one, it makes the priest what's called an alter Christos, A-L-T-E-R, Christos, C-H-R-I-S-T-U-S. It makes the priest an alter Christos. Now, what does that mean? It configures the priest to the priesthood of Christ, because every priest's priesthood is a share in the high priesthood of Christ. Christ is the high priest. All the other priests share in his high priesthood. Now, Holy Orders enables a priest to do that. It makes him an alter Christos, which configures his priesthood to the priesthood of Christ. And therefore, it makes him, as we say, it makes him an instrument in the hands of Christ, which allows the priest to continue Christ's work of redemption. Okay? Christ's famous words to his apostles, as the Father sent me, so I send you. So the first thing that Holy Orders does is it makes the priest an alter Christos. Okay? It configures him to Christ, it configures his priesthood to Christ, thereby making him an instrument in the hands of Christ and enabling the priest to continue Christ's work of redemption. That's one thing Holy Orders does. The next thing it does, in addition to making the priest an alter Christus, it also enables him to act in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. So when the priest exercises his priestly, his ministerial duties as a priest, he's doing it in persona Christi. He's doing it in the person of Christ, which means the priest doesn't act when he exercises his priestly ministry. He doesn't act in his own name. He acts in the name of Christ. Another way of saying that is when the priest performs his priestly ministry, Christ acts through him. So he's acting in the name of Christ. Christ is acting through him when the priest exercises his priestly ministry, because Holy Orders enables the priest to act in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. And we see this most clearly when the priest celebrates Mass and when the priest administers the sacraments. When he celebrates Mass, when he's administering the sacraments, he is administering them in the person of Christ, okay? And he's doing it because he's been configured to Christ and his priesthood by being an alter Christos. So an alter Christos and in persona Christi, two things that the sacrament of Holy Orders gives the priest. They are separate things, but they are connected, okay? Because being configured to Christ, being configured to his priesthood, the extension of that is it enables the priest to act in the person of Christ and for Christ to act through him. So Alter Christos, that's one thing. In persona Christi, that's the other. Another thing Holy Orders does is it enables the priest to dispense what are called the mysteries of Christ. Now, what are these mysteries? The Mass and the sacraments. So by virtue of Holy Orders, he can administer the Mass and the sacraments. He can administer the mysteries of Christ. And we find this, if you're wondering if this is even biblical, we find this in St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 1. Listen to what St. Paul says. Let a man so regard us as ministers of Christ and dispensers of his mysteries. So the fact that the priest, being an alter Christos, being configured to Christ, acting in persona Christi, is able to administer the mysteries of Christ, the Mass, and the sacraments, as St. Paul indicated in that first letter to the Corinthians. So those are the three main things that a Holy Orders confers upon a man when he receives them, okay? Now, let's hit the pause button, and let's answer probably the two biggest questions regarding this sacrament that you often hear. Maybe we've had them posed to us. Maybe we have those questions. And that is, what's the deal with women priests and what's the deal with celibacy? Okay? And the women priests, that question often comes up in the form of, why doesn't the Catholic Church ordain women as priests? And then kind of a follow-up question is, will the Catholic Church ever get to the point of ordaining women as priests? And the answer, emphatically, no. Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1577. Only a baptized man validly receives ordination. So the Church does not, nor can it, ever ordain women as priests. That's not going to happen. Now you might say, well, why not? Well, for some very valid, certainly theological reasons, but also logical reasons. Okay? Let me give you 6 of them. 6 reasons why the Catholic Church has not, is not, nor ever will ordain women as priests. Number 1, the priesthood is a calling. It's not a rite. Okay? A person does not claim the office of priesthood by himself. Christ calls him to it. So reason number 1 is that takes priesthood out of the realm of women being ordained, is it's not a rite. It's a calling, and it's a calling from Christ. That's the first fundamental reason. Now let's examine this calling from Christ a little closer. Who did Christ call? He called men. The 12 original apostles were all men. Could he have called women? Certainly. He chose, he deigned to call men. Okay? And because of that, all right, the Church honors that. This is Christ's church. The Catholic Church is a church Christ founded. And if Christ called only men, his church doesn't have the luxury or right to do anything different. If the church were to do something different than what Christ ordained it to do, it would no longer be his church. So, number 1, the priesthood is a calling, not a rite. Number 2, Christ called only men. And if you think about it, look at the women he could have called. He could have called his own mother, Mary, but he didn't. He could have called Mary Magdalene, but he didn't. So the fact that Christ chose not to call his mother to be a priest, but only men, all right, that's the second reason. Now, let's go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and let's confirm this. Paragraph 1578. No one has the right to receive holy orders. No one claims the office for himself. He is called to it by God. Like every grace, this sacrament can be received only as an unmerited gift. That backs up the fact it's a calling and not a right. Now, what does the Catechism say about Christ choosing only men? Paragraph 1577. The practice of ordaining only baptized men rests on the decision of Christ to call only men to these orders in the church. Not even Mary, his own mother, was called. Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1577. So, let's review. It's a calling, not a right. Christ only chose men. And then those men, when it came time to choose their successors, they followed Christ's, and they only chose men. Catechism of the Catholic Church again, paragraph 1577 again. The Lord Jesus chose men from the college of 12 apostles, and the apostles did the same when they chose men to succeed them in their ministry. So, calling not a right. Christ chose only men. His apostles chose only men to succeed them. Reason number 4, we've already indicated, right? The priest is an alter Christos. The priest is configured to Christ. Christ is a man. So to be configured to a man, you have to be a man. Number 5, as we've mentioned, the priest acts in persona Christi. He acts in the person of Christ. Christ is a man. So in order to act in the person of Christ, you have to be a man. Reason number 6, Christ is the divine bridegroom. His church is the bride. Christ and his church have a spousal type of relationship. He's the groom. His church is the bride. Grooms are men. All right? So those that are configured to Christ and his priesthood, priests also have to be men. So when we say the Catholic Church cannot ordain women as priests, and when people say, well, why not? There are 6 theological reasons, as well as 6 logical and practical reasons. So like everything the church does, there is a reason behind it. And those 6 reasons are the reasons behind the Catholic Church cannot ordain women as priests. So that's our answer to that question. Another question that often comes up is a question of celibacy. You know, why are priests celibate? Okay, you know, what does that do for the priesthood? Well, consider these 2 things. One, being celibate, not being married. Okay, it allows the priest to devote his full time and energy to the service of God's people. He doesn't have, if you will, divided loyalties, okay? He can devote all his time, all his efforts to the service of God's people if he's not married. The second is the priest is a living symbol of life in heaven. And as such, life in heaven, there's going to be no marriage, there's going to be no sexual intercourse, because there's going to be no further need for procreation. So since life in heaven is not going to include marriage or sexual intercourse, and the priest is a living symbol of that life, the priest, no marriage, no sexual intercourse. So those are the 2 main reasons, if you will, regarding priests not being able to marry. So let's kind of review what we've learned about holy orders before we move on to our second sacrament this episode, holy matrimony. It's administered by the bishop. There are 3 degrees of it: bishop, priest, and deacon. It is biblical. Do this in memory of me, and the foot washing ritual, both done on Holy Thursday night in the upper room before Christ goes to the sacrifice of the cross and priests offer sacrifices. We've talked about 3 main things that holy orders confers upon a man. It makes him an alter Christos. It configures him to Christ. It configures his priesthood to Christ. His priesthood is a share of Christ's high priesthood. And it enables him to act in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, when celebrating Mass and administering the sacraments, and acting in the person of Christ. Christ acts through him. The priest does not act of his own name. He acts in the name of Christ, and Christ acts through him. And it also enables the priest to be a dispenser of the mysteries of God, those being the celebration of the Mass and the administration of the sacraments. And then we also answered why the Catholic Church cannot and will not ordain women. And we've also answered the question about priests not being able to be married, being celibate. So again, as we said last week when we looked at baptism, confirmation, and anointing of the sick, this is not nearly an exhaustive treatment of each of these sacraments. You can do a series on each one, arguably. But the goal here is to give us enough knowledge and enough information and enough background so we know more about these sacraments than we did before we started this series. So that's holy orders. Now let's move on to the second sacrament we're going to consider in this episode, that being holy matrimony. We often refer to it as marriage, but the official title is holy matrimony. And we'll cover the same kind of ground for this sacrament that we covered for holy orders and the previous ones. We'll talk about how it's administered, what its matter and form is, what its effects are, etc. So let's start with how it's administered. And now this one might surprise you, because in looking at the sacraments we've done so far, we've noticed that each of the sacraments, and so far we've done baptism, confirmation, anointing, and holy orders, we've noticed each of the sacraments is administered by somebody that has holy orders confirmed on them. Either a priest, or in the case of baptism, also a deacon, or in the case of holy orders, a bishop. So somebody that's received holy orders is the one that administers the sacrament. Not so in holy matrimony. Did you know that the couple themselves, the man and the woman, administer the sacrament to each other? Now you might be saying, well, Charles, I had no idea. But wait a second now, I'm thinking in my mind's eye, the last wedding I attended, and there was a priest up there, and he was doing a lot of things and saying a lot of things. So you're telling me he wasn't administering the sacrament? The couple was actually administering it to themselves? The answer is yes. The couple is the administrators of this sacrament, which then begs the question, right? Well, then what does the priest do? What is his role? Okay, the priest is the official representative of the church. He's the church's official witness to this marriage. He is the official presider over it to make sure that it's done in the proper way. But as far as who administers the sacrament, it's the couple themselves. And if you're saying, wow, I had no idea, that's why we're doing these courses. Now, what's the matter and the form? Okay. Now, here again, this is maybe a little unexpected. We know the matter of any sacrament is the tangible element. We know the form are the words. So now you're thinking of holy matrimony, and you're thinking, okay, if the matter is a tangible element, what is the tangible element of this particular sacrament? Now, you might say, oh, that's easy. It's the rings. Okay, they're tangible, right? Actually, the matter of this sacrament is the exchange of the vows. The matter of this sacrament is the consent that the man and woman are giving to each other, okay? Because in this consent lies the act of the will, where the man and woman pledge themselves to each other. So the matter of this sacrament is the exchange of vows, which includes the consent, and the consent is given by an act of the will by each party, okay? The form is the actual words of that consent, all right? So the consent is the exchange of vows, the matter is the exchange of vows. The consent is the wording of those vows. So little curiosity, a little change here on how this sacrament is, who administers it, and its matter and form. Now, what is it? Well, let's start here. It's holy matrimony, the state of marriage, is a covenant, not a contract. And if you say, well, covenant, contract, they're basically the same thing, aren't they? They're really kind of two different ways of saying the same thing. Wrong and wrong. A covenant is something completely different than a contract. Holy matrimony is a covenant, not a contract. Why? A contract, if you go down to the fundamentals of these definitions, a contract involves an exchange of things or an exchange of property, okay? I don't know. I repair your car, you pay me money. We make a contract. We exchange things. A covenant is an exchange of persons, okay? In that example, I give you my expertise in fixing cars, you give me your cash. In holy matrimony, in a covenant, I give you my entire person. I give you my entire being. You give me your entire being. So contracts exchange things, covenants exchange persons. Contracts are a giving and receiving of things. Covenants are a giving and receiving of persons. And since the couple in holy matrimony are giving their whole selves to each other, it's a covenant, not a contract. So that's the first thing beyond, who administers it and its matter and form. That's the first thing we can say about this particular sacrament. It's a covenant and not a contract, and they are two different things. Now, how might we define it? Well, there's all kinds of different definitions for it. This is the one I like the best. This is the one I always use because, in my view, this is the one that captures all the aspects of this sacrament. Now, a fair warning, the definition is about a paragraph long, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it straight through, and then I'm going to pull out a number of different parts of it. And we're going to kind of unpack each part. And in unpacking each part, we'll be able to understand this definition of this sacrament, holy matrimony. So first I'll read it all the way through. And I'll have it memorized. Holy matrimony is the intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love entered into by a man and a woman at the design of the Creator for the purpose of their own good and for the purpose of the procreation and education of children. Let me read that again, because there's a lot in there. That's why I'm going to kind of parse it out so we can kind of understand this. Holy matrimony is the intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love entered into by a man and a woman at the design of the Creator for the purpose of their own good and for the purpose of the procreation and education of children. Now, it's a mouthful, granted, but I like it because in my mind, it really captures the essence of this sacrament. So let's kind of pick it apart a little bit as will, okay? The definition, if you look at it kind of grammatically, it says that matrimony is a communion of life and love. And then it attaches three things to that communion. It's intimate, it's exclusive, it's indissoluble. So, how is this communion of life and love that matrimony is, how is it intimate? Okay, what do we mean by intimate? Okay, well, matrimony is the most intimate relationship that a man and a woman can have. Okay, because as we indicated, it's a complete and total giving and sharing of your entire person. A complete and total giving and sharing of your entire person. That's about as intimate as you can get, okay? And in this total and complete sharing of the whole person, the spouses, without losing their individual personhoods, become one flesh, as Christ indicated. So when we say this is an intimate communion of life and love, that's what we mean. Now, we also say it's an exclusive communion of life and love, okay? Which means this sacrament demands the total fidelity of the spouses to each other. And total. And you can't get more exclusive than that, okay? When we say this communion of life and love is indissoluble, okay, we're saying, look, the man and the woman are joining themselves together in this sacrament, not through some passing emotion that comes and goes or can fade away, okay? They're entering into it through an act of their own free will, okay? They're giving their mutual consent to this communion of life and love, and this mutual consent is sealed by the Holy Spirit Himself. So when we say it's indissoluble, that's what we mean. And we know Christ touched on that when He said, what God brings together, let no man tear asunder. So it's indissoluble, okay? Till death do you part. Now, this intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love, going further in the definition now, is entered into by a man and a woman, period. All right? Because the complementary of the sexes is essential for a marriage. Because as we'll learn in a couple of seconds, there are two aspects to this. There's a unitive aspect and there's a procreative aspect. And by virtue of the fact that this one aspect of this union is procreative, one aspect of this matrimony, this sacrament is procreative, the complementary of the sexes is essential to it. So marriage, matrimony, can only be defined in terms of one man, one woman. Any other configuration, it can be called a union, but it cannot be called a marriage, because a marriage is between a man and a woman, period. Now, this intimate, tracking through it, the intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love entered into by a man and a woman is done so at the design of the Creator. What does this mean? Simply put, this means God is the author of marriage. And as the author of marriage, it's governed by his laws. We, man and woman, we are not free to change that. He's the author of it. It's governed by his laws. We are not free to alter those or to add to them or subtract from them. Okay? This is an institution. This is a sacrament he instituted. He's the author of it. It's governed by his laws, and end of story. That's what at the design of the Creator means in this definition. And then the definition finishes by indicating the two purposes. That this intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love entered into by a man and a woman at the design of the Creator is for the purpose of their own benefit. Okay? Now, what does this mean? What this means is, and again, Christ touched on this when he said, it is not good for man to be alone. Okay? Now, there are two benefits at play here, right? One is the earthly benefit, all right? To be a support, a partner, as the couple journeys through all the vicissitudes of life, the trials, the tribulations, the sufferings, the heartaches, the highs and lows, to be a partner, to be a support, okay? So there's an earthly purpose for it, but there's also a spiritual purpose for it as well, because in this sacrament, the couple, the man and the woman, are supposed to help each other get to heaven. So you've got the earthly benefit and you've got the spiritual benefit. And then the other purpose that this definition calls out is for the purpose of the education and procreation of children, okay? That tells us that children are a constituent part of matrimony, of marriage. Children are not an add-on. They're not an extra. They are the fruit of the conjugal love that man and woman enter into in this sacrament, in this state of matrimony, okay? And the couple's responsibilities, once they procreate the children, is to educate them. So, let's roll back now that we've picked the definition apart and you know a little bit about each of the constituent parts of it. Let's go back and one final time read the definition all the way through, now with us knowing what all these parts mean. It's the intimate, exclusive, indissoluble communion of life and love entered into by a man and a woman at the design of the Creator for the purpose of their own good and for the purpose of the procreation and education of children. Now, one other thing we should mention at this point. Christ deigned to raise this state to a sacrament. And we might ask, well, why? And because in order to faithfully carry out this state, we need grace. And as we've learned in episode 1, what is the primary channel of grace? The sacraments. That's why Christ, being God, being all-knowing, he knows that this man and this woman, fallen human nature, because of original sin, right? They're going to need help faithfully fulfilling the responsibilities of what they're about to enter. They're going to need divine help. They're going to need grace, and therefore, they're going to need a channel to get this grace to them. That's why Christ raised this to a sacrament. As we've said, he's, being God, he's a whole lot smarter than we are, and he thinks a whole lot further ahead than we do. So, we've talked about who administers it, its matter and form, its definition. We talked about why Christ raised it to a sacrament. Let's also speak a little bit about the two aspects of it, unitive and procreative, okay? It's unitive in that man and a woman are giving their, it's a total, like we said, it's a total and complete giving, sharing of your whole person, okay? And this total and complete sharing and giving of your whole person, that's what makes it unitive. And then, of course, God gave us the ability to create children along with Him. So there's your procreative aspect. And one of the things we should also mention here about this procreative aspect is something that maybe we don't consider as much as we should or at all, and that is by being able to procreate, God is giving this man and this woman a share of His creative power. Have we ever thought of that? Now, God, the creator of the universe, is giving this man and this woman a sharing in His creative power by being able to procreate. I mean, that's really amazing because God didn't have to do that, but He did. You know, that's why one of the many reasons why, in addition to holding the unitive aspect so sacred, it also holds the procreative aspect so sacred because it's a sharing in God's creative power that He didn't have to give us. It's a great gift. So I thought I'd pass that along. Now, one other thing that I should mention is that one of the aspects of that definition indicated that this is indissoluble, right? What God brings together, let no man tear asunder, right? So let's pose the question, for those of us that maybe might get this question, why is it indissoluble? Okay. Well, number one, two reasons. Okay. Number one, Christ is the bridegroom, His church is the bride, right? Christ has like we mentioned in holy orders, Christ has a spousal relation with His church. And that spousal relation is going to last forever, right? Christ is not going to walk away from His church. He's not going to say, well, I'm tired of you people always sinning. I've had it with you. I'm walking away. I'm breaking this spousal relationship, right? Christ and the church are inexorably united, joined. So the indissolubility of marriage, that aspect of it, is a sharing of Christ's spousal relationship with His church. Okay, it's not going to be broken. The other reason is the incarnation. Christ, through the incarnation, true God and now true man. He has a divine nature and a human nature. Two natures, but still one person. The man and the woman, two individuals, but one flesh. And Christ's divine and human nature, they're not going to be broken. Okay? Christ's divine and human nature exists now in heaven. All right? So because Christ's spousal relationship with His church is not going to be broken, and since Christ's two natures are not going to be broken, matrimony, marriage, cannot be broken. It's indissoluble. Finally, let's weave in one question, and that is this question of annulments. Because a lot of times people, when you say, well, you know, what is an annulment? Let me take a step back. Because of the indissolubility of this, the Catholic Church does not recognize divorce, okay? Even if a couple gets civilly divorced, they're still sacramentally married, okay? They're still married in the eyes of the Church. So the question of annulments come up. And people, maybe you've heard this, people will say, oh, yeah, I know what an annulment is. An annulment is like a Catholic divorce. And that's not correct. An annulment is not a Catholic divorce, because you can't say Catholic and divorce in the same breath, right? An annulment, its official title is a decree of nullity. And if a couple gets an annulment, what that means is that the church doesn't recognize this as a sacrament from the beginning. In other words, an annulment says this couple was not sacramentally married from the beginning. There really is no sacramental marriage. And if there is no sacramental marriage, then that makes divorce a moot point. Now, in order for the church to say, you know, this wasn't a sacramental marriage from the beginning, because there were certain impediments. And there's a list of impediments. I'll read you some of the bigger ones or some of the more time-honored ones, okay? If the marriage is between close relatives, that's an impediment. If one or the other or both were already in a separate marriage when they got married, that's an impediment. If the man has received holy orders and then marries, that's an impediment. If the man or the woman took a vow of chastity, and because one of the aspects of marriage is procreative, that's going to be impediment. Age, if you're below the allowable age, that's going to be an impediment. So if the church sees any of these impediments, okay, they will say that the church will say, well, this was not a valid sacramental marriage to begin with, okay? So it's not like an annulment is a Catholic divorce of a Catholic marriage. An annulment says there was no Catholic marriage to begin with. Trying to just kind of bring it down to just the basics within this episode. So I'm kind of eyeballing the monitor. Not bad, 52 minutes. So again, hopefully coming out of this episode, we know a lot more about the sacrament of holy orders and the sacrament of holy matrimony. Next episode, episode 5, our final episode in this series, we'll look at the sacrament of reconciliation, and we'll take a look at the sacrament of the Eucharist. So until then, again, I'm Charles Merritt. Thank you for supporting Fresh Catholic. Thank you for watching these teaching series. And until episode 5, take care and God bless.